Although HIV remains a huge worldwide epidemic, in North Carolina, more pregnant women are being tested and treated for the virus. Since 1993, the number of North Carolina children born with HIV has gone down by 90%. And joining me now is one of the producers of this story, Dr. Tom Linden, the Glaxo Wellcome Distinguished Professor of Medical Journalism at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Linden, good to see you again. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Marita.
Now, I know that this bringing the story to North Carolina now was not a singular effort. Tell me about the other people involved in this project.
Well, it was actually a class project. I teach a course at the School of Journalism and Mass Communication on medical television reporting. And so the piece you just saw, and also the piece that ran the previous night on gene therapy and sickle cell disease, were actually produced by 7 students, half of them from the School of Journalism and Mass Communication and half from the School of Public Health. And they wrote the pieces, they produced them, they interviewed the various people we saw on the air, including Daniel the boy, and they researched the topic. So it was really a student production, and I think you'd agree, very professional as well. And
it had the professional oversight by yourself and some of the editorial staff here at North Carolina Now, so they had to follow some guidelines, so to speak.
Well, it was a tremendous learning experience, especially working with the pros here at UNC-TV, because the students came to the project and had specific ideas about what they wanted to do, and they realized that in producing a piece for television, there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of modification and compromise that goes on. But ultimately, I think we got a better piece as a result.
You mentioned that the students are a mix of journalism students and students in the School of Public Health. I wondered about the students that are studying public health and the differences that they brought to the story than the journalism students.
Well, they were bringing a public health, a medical, a scientific background, so they knew the scientific issues. They didn't necessarily know the journalism, although a couple of them did have writing and journalism backgrounds. The journalism students, they know how to write, they know how to report, but they didn't necessarily know the science. So there was a nice integration of science and journalism that there was really cross-fertilization that took place, and I think it was a great experience for all the students, and hopefully we produced pieces that you enjoyed seeing.
How difficult is it to report on medical advancements?
Well, it's very difficult because there's the tendency to overstate or overestimate the benefits of scientific breakthroughs, especially when we talk about, let's say, gene therapy. And you have to really hold yourself back, restrain, not oversell the topic. At the same time, I really strongly believe that it's helpful to teach people some of the science behind the issues. So it's a fine line between not overselling the topic, but yet explaining the science in ways that people can understand.
Mm-hmm. Now, you are a medical doctor, so you bring to it an experience that a lot of us don't, who are journalists and can provide that information in the story. So let's talk about each of the stories, if we can, and maybe something that we learned out of them. Starting first with the piece that we saw tonight about the young man dealing with AIDS and what he has to go through. What struck you most about that piece?
Well, it was a very emotional piece, and every time I see that piece, tears come to my eyes, because it's a really very moving story, and to think that this 10-year-old boy has been living with HIV probably his whole life, he just has known about it for the last 5 years, is tremendously moving. And then when I realized, and he explained it in the piece, how kids his age have teased him, and of course kids don't tease other kids with HIV on their own, so they are learning this from other people, from the culture, maybe even from parents. So it was very, very moving to me, and very upsetting in some ways to realize that kids are discriminated against for something over which they have no control.
Mm-hmm. And the sickle cell package, what struck me the most about that was just how mind-boggling it is, the advancements that are being made in that area. But something that you touched upon in the story were the ethics that is involved in, yes, we have the knowledge to do this, but should we do this?
That's right. I mean, we've pretty much agreed in the scientific community that we're not going to change the genetics of individuals so that they're changed in future generations. But there's the possibility to change the genes of some individuals in specific ways that won't be passed on to future generations. But that even involves a lot of ethical issues, and there's a whole history of what is called eugenics that took place earlier in the century, which involved, in some cases, involuntary sterilization. And so we have to be very careful that people aren't labeled or identified as, quote, genetically defective, and also that we keep that information private. Insurance companies might discriminate against you or me if they knew we had a genetic problem. So these are major ethical issues. And then the other issue, I think, is not to oversell the potential benefits of genetic therapy.
Dr. Linden, now that this project is over and you can sit back and breathe a sigh of relief, what do you think your students have learned from it?
Well, I think they've learned how difficult it is to tell a scientific or medical story on television. Even with the 6 minutes that you graciously gave us, that's still not a lot of time, and it's very complex. And I think the most important message they may have learned is the need to put a face on diseases or a face on science. And by actually seeing Daniel, we all felt what it must be like to be a kid with HIV, or to see the kids last night who had sickle cell disease, how that must feel. So every science issue is interesting, but we ultimately must remember that it involves human beings who have feelings and emotions.
All right. Well, Dr. Linden, it was good having you here. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for being here.
And I hope we can do it all over again next semester.
All right. Thank you.